Hello, all. In continuing my reviews of sometimes somewhat obscure vampire movies, I come across one of my favorites, which is Young Hannah, Queen of the Vampires from 1973. This movie was a joint U.S. and Spanish production. There are actually two different versions. There's the Spanish version and there's the U.S. version. And the Spanish version was directed by a guy named Julio Salvador, who also wrote the Spanish version. The American version, which has some extended scenes, I believe including the final scene, was directed by Ray Danton and written by, oh, I'm losing my track here, Lois Gibson. Um, it stars principally Andrew Prine, um, Patty Shepard, Mark Damon, and the very beautiful Teresa Gimpera, who was a Spanish actress and model, very beautiful blonde lady, and who does not speak a single word of dialogue in the entire movie, which makes it really ultra creepy. I think one of the best vampires because she doesn't speak, and yet she has this incredible power both of attraction and repulsion, and she conveys this brilliantly. I thought. It's a story of a man played by uh, Andrew Prine, who goes to an island where his father in the first scene is mysteriously killed. We see a priest praying at this tomb, marble tomb, on which there is an image of a woman and a wolf. And he's saying something like, "Oh, Hannah, please bring us eternal life." And he's lighting these candles. He's in a black robe. Uh, we don't see his face. But then an archaeologist is coming to explore this ancient church, and he stumbles into this chamber, which is underground. He sees this kind of wild man, and the wild man is running away from him. He's chasing him, and he comes across a goat with its throat slit, and it's like dripping its blood all over him. He bashes into it. And then he uh, goes down into this basement where the priest is conducting this ritual, and the priest sneaks up behind him and strangles him to death. As he's examining this tomb, the only thing you see is he uncovers the faceplate, the inscription rather on the tomb, which says Hannah 1226, and then the rest of it's in Latin, and we don't really see what it says, and it's revealed later. But the high priest who we'd seen earlier, played by Mark Damon, sneaks up and strangles him to death. And then he and this wild man, the tomb is up on a plinth, and it stands up above the floor. It's a very heavy marble sarcophagus. They slide the body of the archaeologist under the plinth and knock the supports out, and it crushes him and decapitates him. Later, we see his son arrive, who wants to find out what happened to his father and just say goodbye to him, basically. And he's being told the local people are very unfriendly. They won't even talk to him. They're fishermen, and they're just sitting there repairing their nets and kind of look at him suspiciously. And eventually, he's met by Matt Damon as Peter, and who says, "I wasn't expecting you so early," and says, "Well, why won't these people talk to me?" He says, "You're a stranger. I've been here for a year, and they barely talk to me." That's just sort of the way they are. Um, and then he's asking him questions about his father and what happened, and he's being a bit circumspect. He says, "How did he end up under the crypt?" And he said, "Well, we don't know. He must have been exploring it, and we know he was an archaeologist, and the supports were loose and cracked. It's 700 years old, and it collapsed and crushed him." It's a somewhat believable scenario, but you got the feeling that Chris doesn't really quite believe this, and is trying to find out a little bit more. And he wants to know, who is this? Who is buried in here? He says, "Well, it was a young wife of King Louis VII of France." King Louis VII was real and was a king from. He was born in. I believe it's 1187, he died in 1226, and of course Hannah's date is 1226. And she was allegedly his bride. He had gone on a crusade, which again he did. He was a crusader, and he came back from the Holy Land with this very beautiful young bride, Hannah. But people didn't like her; they were suspicious of her. And they took her to this island. People warned him not to go to this island, not to stay on this island, because it was known that as Vampire Island. He said, "Oh, that's nonsense. I don't believe in vampires," and took his whole crew aboard of knights to stay just for a night, and then they were going to go back to France and get married. Well, the locals tried to warn him, don't come here and, go back, and he wouldn't listen, and overnight they were all turned into vampires, including Hannah. And he ordered his crusaders to kill all of them. They staked all the vampires except Hannah, and Philip, or Louis rather, couldn't countenance killing her, just he was still in love with her. So instead, he buried her alive in this enormous marble crypt. And that was supposed to be and that happened 700 years before the story takes place. And so he's telling him, about this, and he says, "Well, you don't believe any of that vampire stuff, do you?" He says, "Oh, no, of course not. But these locals have, a lot of superstitions, and, we need to respect, what they believe." Well, he also has a sister, played by Patty Shepard, who is a school teacher, and her name is Mary. And she also kind of believes in this stuff, and he's a little bit incredulous that somebody who is educated would believe these kind of odd myths. And she says, "Well, you haven't lived here very long. You don't know what it's like here." There are a lot of the villagers don't like him. They kind of want him to leave, and he decides that he wants to bury his father, and he has to lift the sarcophagus off of his body in order to do that. And they're saying, the locals won't cooperate with you. And he said, "Well, I've got to build a winch, and I have to get this done." And at first, the locals are very reluctant, and they're afraid that he's going to unseal the tomb. And he's like, "Come on, there's nothing going to be in there after 700 years except a skeleton. You're being silly and stupid and superstition." At first he's not really able to persuade them. And he said, "Look, my father was a good man. Are you just going to leave him under there?" And that kind of convinces them, and they help him. He says, "We're going to have to do this in two stages. The thing is like, several tons, and we're going to have to lift the lid and then the sarcophagus." Well, they lift the lid with this enormous hoist that he's built, a block and tackle, basically. And when they pull the lid off with these huge iron hooks, he looks inside, and there is Hannah, who is still young and beautiful and perfectly preserved, and that's Teresa Gimpera. And he doesn't understand, how could she be this well preserved after 700 years? And Mark Damon says, "Well, maybe maybe there was a perfect vacuum." And he said, "After 700 years, I don't really think so." And he's trying to figure out a logical reason why. Meanwhile, we see that Hannah turns into a green mist, and then the green mist turns into a wolf. And again, of course, there was a wolf on the lid of the sarcophagus carved into it, a statue actually. And then the wolf goes after this sort of blind old sailor who's very superstitious, and lures out and kills his dog. It was a golden retriever called Barney. And he's telling the townspeople, that thing that killed Barney, that's Hannah. She can turn into a wolf. They're going, "Oh, come on, you're just being silly and superstitious. There's no such thing as somebody who could turn into a wolf." And she says, "Well, you don't know." And they say, "Yeah, there's no wolves on this island." And I forgot a detail. Peter had told him when he was telling them this story about Hannah, he says that the island that they came to was known as Vampire Island, and that's one of the reasons they didn't want to go there. But at that time, apparently it's not known as that anymore. So now they're, the villagers, the old blind sailor says, "Gather garlic flowers and put them in her," he calls them dog bane, but he's actually talking about garlic. And says, "Put them in her crypt, and then she won't be able to get out, because right now she can only turn into a wolf. But if she's now drunk blood, and she'll start to become stronger. And if she gets stronger, she can turn into a human, and then she can attack humans." And, they're all very, very incredulous of this, but they eventually do it. The wild man, as they call him, tries to kidnap Mary, and he is intercepted by Chris, who wrestles with him and is fighting with him and he tries to kill him with this big long like Bowie knife, and he's got a scarred face, and half of his face is covered by a leather mask, and he pulls the leather mask off. So he's got this horrible burned right side of his face, and he screams in horror and runs away. And apparently he's ashamed of the way that he looks. He's deaf and mute also, but he saves Mary, and saying, what the heck was that all about? And she says, I don't know. He just showed up in my room and tried to kidnap me. He unknowingly, he's the servant of both Hannah and Peter, and does what they want. He's also kind of sadistic, as he shows in the scene when they decapitated his father. He's like playing with his head and twirling it around like it's a toy. And it's kind of gross. It was a pretty gory movie for 1973, but nothing excessive really, but still pretty gross. And anyway, now they're all worried about, well, she's going to get out of the tomb, and the blind sailor is telling his young friend Adnan to make a big, stake, make wooden stakes so they can stop Hannah, and also make a crucifix because they can't, vampires can't stand the sight of a crucifix. And he's starting to do that. He's on the beach, and he's starting to make this crucifix out of a couple pieces of wood, and the savage sneaks up behind him and slits his throat, and apparently steals away the stake that he was making. And then in a later scene, they go back to Chris and Peter go down into the tomb, and they're going to seal it back up now. And then they're going to try to lift the other piece off of his father's body. And they find that the old blind sailor has been killed also, and he's hung up by one of these hooks by his neck, and his blood is dripping down into the tomb. And you see that Hannah's lips are starting to turn red, and there's more like vitality in her face. So obviously this sacrifice has actually started to make her stronger. I don't remember how, but using her hypnotic power, as it were, she kind of entrances Chris, and he removes the dog bane from her tomb, and then he looks back in the tomb and she's gone. Then she turns again into some sort of a mist, and she vanishes. The villagers are now like really starting to panic. She goes into a bar and kills one of the fishermen. Sinks her fangs into him. One interesting thing that I noticed: most vampire movies of this time, vampire fangs were only the top incisors. In this movie, she has fangs both above and below, and I thought that was kind of interesting. That they made it more like animal fangs. That I thought was an interesting and well done detail. Anyway, she vampirizes this guy in the bar who's like the lead fisherman. I don't remember his name. I'll look it up. But then a series of events occurs again. The wild man tries to kidnap Mary, and is ultimately intercepted by Chris, who now throws the stake that he was going to save for Hannah and stabs the wild man instead, kills him. And his body drops. It was hung up to a bell in the church and starts ringing the bell. That kind of alerts Hannah to what's going on. So again, she, like I said, she can do a lot of things that were later attributed to things like Dracula. She can turn into a mist. She can turn into a wolf. She can vanish. She can teleport from one place to another almost instantly. She can fly, and hypnotize people. And she has a power of seduction, even though there's very little. There's like one sex scene in the whole movie, and it's not explicit. They don't show you anything, and that's Chris and Mary make love in one scene, but you don't all you see is her back, and that's a little tame for a 1970s movie, especially considering the things like The Vampire Lovers and Lust for a Vampire and Twins of Evil and things like that, which were very exploitative and showed a lot more than this movie does. But again, Spanish horror was a bit different. And so now the servant is dead, the wild man. The villagers have gathered to try to stop Hannah. They're all carrying these big, huge iron crucifixes, and they have stakes ready for her. And so they chase her out of her mausoleum, and she runs off onto this hilltop. And she's trying to seduce Chris, and I don't know why he doesn't completely fall for her. She almost has him in her grip, and then these villagers break in with the crucifixes. Oh, and she turns back into a wolf, and she's wrestling with him. And he tells Mary, "Here, take these garlic flowers; they'll protect you." Gives them to her, and then she sees this from the school where she's hidden, runs down and throws the garlic flowers on top of the wolf, and the wolf runs away. And so now she's returned the favor of saving him, since he saved her twice, actually. And then he says, we have to get her. He takes this oil lantern, and they're looking for her, and the villagers are looking for her, and they've got torches. They're a little bit cliched there, but they chase her onto this sort of cliff top, overlooking the ocean. And this is kind of interesting. I've never saw a vampire death this way. Chris throws his oil lamp, and it bursts open and catches the hem of her dress, her robe, on fire. And she falls off this cliff and makes this horrible shriek. I don't know how they got this special sound effect, but really, really horrifying noise. Like, really awful. And she's burning up. They get down to the bottom of the cliff, and now she's no longer this young, beautiful queen. She's this horrible, old, gnarled, awful thing that just has these long fangs and like a skull for a head, and really awful looking, and is still making this horrible shriek, and then starts crying, and they're, for an instant, they're kind of, pity her, but then she lunges again, and Chris stabs the stake through her, and she collapses. Then the final, one of the penultimate scene, he's burying his father up on the hillside. The final scene, which I think this scene was added only for the U.S. version, there were these two little school children who we had seen earlier in Mary's class, a boy who was being punished for insolence, and a little blonde girl. And in an earlier scene, we had seen Hannah visit the little blonde girl and apparently bite her. I don't know. They didn't show it. But in the end, the little boy is watching Chris and Mary leave the island on this little boat, the same boat that brought him in. And they leave, and they go around the headland, and then he runs back to the schoolhouse, and the little girl says from inside, little blonde girl says, "Did you do what I asked you to do?" And he says, "Yes, they're gone now. And why don't you come out and play?" She says, "I don't like to be on the sunlight anymore. You come in here to me." And he goes inside the schoolhouse, closes the door behind him, and he walks up to her, and she opens her mouth. She's got fangs, and he screams. And that's the end. And over the end titles, you see him running away from her in stills, not in actual motion, which I thought was kind of interesting. The musical composition was quite good. It was directed and produced by a guy named Philip Lambro. And I thought that was really, really quite good. The cinematography was good. The dialogue is a bit stilted, and some of the acting is fairly wooden. Patty Shepard was probably the best actor in the whole thing. She's an American actress, a rather beautiful blue-eyed brunette, and she was quite good. Andrew Prine was a little stiff. Matt Damon was quite good as Peter, who was both, this nice sort of, nice guy writer, and also the high priest of Hannah, as he turns out to be. He's, really wants her to turn him into a vampire, which she does at one point, and then he is staked by one of the villagers. There's a lot of creepy, high-angle shots, a lot of use of fire, very good use of color, because they used it, for a color film, it feels very dark and very strange and eerie, and they had this old, cathedral or church that apparently was all shot in Turkey. Funny, because it's a U.S. and Spanish production. But again, I highly recommend it. The movie has actually several names. I've always known it as Young Hannah, Queen of the Vampires, but it's also known as Crypt of the Living Dead, Vampire Woman, and just Hannah, Queen of the Vampires. Its Spanish title, I believe, is La Isla de Tumbo Maladad, the island of the evil tomb, which I think is pretty accurate because there was a tomb and Hannah's definitely evil. One of the better and more original vampire movies that I've ever seen, and I do highly recommend it. It's available on Tubi for free, and I suggest you watch it, but not at night.